Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 7 of Women Scholars of Orthodox Christianity. Today, our special guest is Dr. Bissera Pencheva of Stanford University. She's really fabulous. You guys are really in for a treat. We even have, because she's an art historian, she came with her slides, she came with her music. We're going to have a great little episode today. Before I get started, just a few announcements. First of all, this is part of the series of the Orthodox Christian Study Center at Fordham University. If you're not really familiar with our work, you can check out our webpage at fordham.edu/orthodoxy. We're really a research center. We sponsor all kinds of projects on a variety of topics such as human rights. We publish a journal, we have book series and so forth. So we do lots of things. This is one of our more public-facing endeavors where we are introducing the community, at least the English-speaking community, to some of the most prolific and influential female scholars working broadly in Orthodox Christian studies in a variety of disciplines. Today, in fact, we have our first art historian. Although, as we're going to discuss, I'm not really sure she's an art historian. She's so much more. Let me offer a special thank you to our donors. We have some anonymous donors who have made this series possible. We are deeply indebted to them. And let me also announce, because we've just released the details, that the Orthodoxy in America lecture, newly named the Economos Orthodoxy in America lecture, which is our center's signature public event, will occur on September 21st, that's a Monday, at 6 p.m. And this year's speaker will be His Eminence Archbishop Elpidophoros of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. He will be speaking about the future of Orthodox Catholic relations in the United States. If this is your first time joining us for one of these webinar episodes, please note that on the bottom of your page, there is a little Q&A box. If you tap that box, you are able to submit questions to Dr. Pencheva. And about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through our episode, we will begin to take audience questions. So please go ahead and send them. It might take us a little bit to get to them. But please do send them and we will see what she has to say. So now, let me make one quick announcement before I introduce Dr. Pencheva, which is that she lives near Stanford in California. And as you may know, California is going through an energy crisis, forest fire crisis, an end of the world crisis and everything else. And so there is a chance that we may lose internet connectivity. If that happens and we can't restore it, we will reschedule. I just want to let people know that this is a possibility, but we are hopeful that we will work our way through this and it won't be a problem. Okay, now, Dr. Bissera Pencheva is a professor of art history at Stanford University. She holds a PhD from Harvard. She had a postdoc at Columbia. She's been a fellow at Dumbarton Oaks. Really, the list goes on and on. She has published 3 books with Pennsylvania State University Press. The first one in 2006 was Icons in Power, The Mother of God in Byzantium, which received the Nicholas Brown Prize of the Medieval Academy of America. The second book, The Sensual Icon, Space, Ritual, and the Senses in Byzantium, was published in 2010. And her most recent monograph, the one that I think people are really excited to hear more about, Hagia Sophia, Sound, Space, and Spirit in Byzantium, which was published in 2017 and received the incredibly prestigious 2018 American Academy of Religion Award in Historical Studies. She has edited the volumes Aural Architecture, published by Ashgate, and icons of sound, architecture, music, and imagination in medieval art with Routledge this year. Her work is informed by phenomenology, placing the attention on the changing appearance of objects and their architectural spaces. We're going to hear more about that. She relies on film to capture this temporal animation stirred by candlelight. Another important strand of her work engages the sonic envelope of the visual, music, and acoustics, and employs auralizations that digitally imprint the performance of chant with the acoustic signature of the specific interior for which it was composed. And we are going to hear a lot about that, I believe. Okay, Bissera, it's so good to have you join the show. I mean, we've done, you know, all of 7 of these, so now I'm calling it a show. So we're so excited to have you with us, and let's just kind of jump right in. You're an art historian, right? What drew you to art history? What happened in your childhood that made you want to do this sort of thing?
George, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It has been a pleasure to think about this forum, to listen to the other talks, get inspired by them, and to have a chance to share some of my engagement with medieval culture with a much broader audience. Thank you.
Right.
You asked about what drew me in art history. It was actually serendipity. I came to the United States as an undergraduate. I went to study at Dartmouth, and I came from a classical high school, and I had Latin and Greek, and at the beginning I chose Latin in the fall quarter, and I realized within the first week that I don't want to do the same thing I've been doing for 5 years, so let me change it. And I switched to Italian. And I realized Dartmouth has 2 programs, one in Florence and one in Siena, and the requirement is 1 art history class. And I happened upon Byzantine art class that was taught by Professor Kathleen Corrigan, and I fell in love with the material. Kathleen Corrigan was amazing. She was the scholar who introduced the marginal psalters of the mid-9th century of Byzantium, where they function almost like cartoons for political events in Constantinople. So this kind of urgency and immediacy of the images that relate to the political and spiritual squabbles for establishing what is the image of Orthodoxy was something that really attracted me. And for the rest, I had my own moments of the prodigal son. 3 years within the program, I decided I wanted to do abstract expressionism.
Oh.
So yes, I shocked everyone, including my father, who said, at least become an architect. So anyways, that was also short-lived, and yes. I came back to Byzantium. This is my 4 years as an undergraduate, where I managed to go through these quick changes. Okay. I guess like many other people.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like you, I'm a Byzantinist, right? I go to the Byzantine Studies Conference, and it's teeming with art historians, right? Everybody at the Byzantine Studies Conference is an art historian. I feel like the odd person out. But you, I mean, from what I've read of your work and the conversations we've had in the past, you're so much more than an art historian, right? I mean, and it's not just that you do the multidisciplinary thing, which we're all trying to do. I mean, you really, really think about art in ways that pull on so many different things, right? Was that when you were going through the program at Harvard, or when you were a younger scholar, was it hard for you to convince your advisors that you wanted to do this, or like where did that come from?
I think it's probably easier with hindsight to determine one particular line that one's academic life had taken in academic and scholarly interest. But I think it's much more complex when it's happening, when you're on the ground. With this distance, I could say I trained in one of the best environments, because Harvard is a place that gives solidity to studies of Byzantium, that you have professors in philology, in history, in the divinity school, and art history. So I always felt that our environment, our cohort of students was so rich with different interests. But they were, what I should say, they were all text-based interests. Even art history is very much a text-based discipline. So the way I see the transformation is actually coming to the West Coast and starting at Stanford, because I felt away from the East Coast, and the West Coast does not have a traditional Byzantine study. So I found myself being the only person that stands for everything. So it is a very, on one hand, very intimidating position. I've always relied on the historians, on the philologists, and the other art historians, and a much richer, anyways. But at the same time, the environment was very intellectually stimulating. And I encountered people who were interested in phenomenology, and they were in comparative literature. And through them, I realized that the voice that speaks, and it speaks to me, is that. And I also lived in a place that California is very easy to imagine as the Mediterranean. And even the little breaks I would take during the day and walk up the hill, we call it the dish. It is like 20 minutes outside the perimeter of the campus. And if I climb up that hill and I look towards the Bay Area, it looks as if I'm standing on the North Shore of Africa and looking towards Italy, Greece, Spain, France. So anyways, it was very, and also the colors and the trees and bushes that grow here. I have two seasons. I encounter gold and green. And this is, in a sense, what allowed me to live in this imaginary space. I am inhabiting the world I'm studying in terms of how the corporeal, sensorial experience that I'm receiving. And that basically allowed me to dream. And many of these dreams, in some cases, I came by chance to the desire to think about spaces in terms of their original illumination, which is not electric light. And one thing led to the other. And eventually from candles, I moved to sound. And now all of this is really working together. So there is a huge dose, in a sense, of allowing to dream about the past.
I love that answer. I really do. You know, I mean, you didn't use the word theology, right? But one of the things and I don't even self-define as a theologian, right? Telly's the theologian, I'm the historian. But what I really, really appreciate about your work is more than any other art historian I've ever met, you actually understand theology. And you don't just understand theology, you think theologically about material culture in ways that I've just never really found in other art historians who are incredibly talented, but they just don't necessarily think in that way. And so that's one of the things that I really, really appreciate about your work. All right, let's jump to Hagia Sophia, because I know everybody wants to talk about Hagia Sophia. So if people watching this live or subsequently the recorded version don't know, Dr. Pencheva knows as much or more about Hagia Sophia than anybody else alive. So we're in for a real treat, and she even brought pictures, and what's going to be very exciting, she brought sound, and she's going to tell you all about the sound and where that came from. So I'm just going to let you kind of take over here and tell us about the Hagia Sophia project and where it came from.
George, thank you very much. You gave me very big compliments. When it comes to, I would like to respond to some parts. When it comes to theology, what I'm interested in is structure. And structure is something that is rooted in texts, and it's also incarnate in material forms. And since the subjects that we study, from liturgy to music to theology, they all come together in the performance in the sacred space, and the way also the sacred space expands out into the city, that ultimately they're all dealing with this capacity to capture the effectiveness of the structure. And because we don't have a roadmap, all of us, we are discovering pieces of the puzzle in different places, and we're putting it together. So when I look to the textual evidence, I usually look for the structure and what there is a right now I don't remember whose essay, I think it was Benjamin's essay on translation. He speaks about translucency, that there is divine language and there are human languages, and the task of the translator is to create translucency so that the divine language could speak out and could become perceptible. And I feel this is, in a sense, our quest. And very frequently, I find the intuition for this structure within texts like Maximus the Confessor, for instance, who was really essential for the way I approached Hagia Sophia. So with this little introduction, I have prepared some images and we're going to see how it works. And George, you can tell me if there's something I need to adjust. Do you all see the images? So George, do you see the images?
Yeah, I see. There you go.
Right now on the screen.
Yep. There you go.
So I will start probably a little bit biographically, autobiographically, of how I came to this topic. I was working on the book Sensual Icon, Sound Space, Sensual Icon, the senses, space, and in Byzantium. And one of the topics that I was exploring was these corporeal icons, that the stylized saint is an image of God, and because he continuously channels the spirit through his body. And this is phenomenally manifested by his capacity to burn incense without the use of fire. So there's this really amazing image for the fantasy, for the imagination, of this materiality that had been incandescent, made incandescent by the descent, continuous descent of the Holy Spirit. And through this topic, I encountered Hagia Sophia. When I say encountered, this is a space that we have all studied from undergraduates to graduate students and in our teaching. But I started to discover it in new light. And it was the inauguration Kontakion for Hagia Sophia that speaks about this intertwining of incense and sound and human voices. And so this notion of pneuma as the smoke, in a sense, that is in the air from the burning incense, of materiality that disintegrates but creates divine presence that is intangible yet perceptible. And here, since you've already heard the wonderful interview with Susan Harvey, I think we can touch on her work. Her work was an inspiration for me. And so this text was very important of introducing the interconnection between smell and sound. And so, and the recognition, as I was reading the text, that there is, singing is about pneuma. It's about the expelling of breath of energy in the air that eventually creates divine reciprocation, or the perception of divine presence. It took many years to realize that, in a sense, what I'm talking about is how human action creates divine reaction and the appearance of the divine as the acoustic, as a bodiless voice, as the reverberation in the space, as the energy of sonic energy reflects from the surfaces of this space, how it creates sonic presence without renouncing invisibility. So it makes God present, in a sense, from the point of view of God, that it is of the creator rather than the creation. So, and it's an enveloping sound. So this took time, took years, in a sense, to arrive. But the first inklings, the first beginnings were there. And through this research on Hagia Sophia, I stumbled upon an essay by several acousticians from the Technical University in Denmark, who had done acoustic measurements of Hagia Sophia and had created a predictive software for acoustic engineers to use. They had done 2 auralizations, which means that they used the acoustic model to imprint on pre-recorded both Byzantine chant as well as Quranic readings. And they had posted it online and one could listen to it. So I was fascinated by an aspect about Hagia Sophia that I've never contemplated before, and it was about sound. And so what I'm showing you right now is the exterior of Hagia Sophia, probably a picture done in the 1980s. And what I love about this image that you're seeing is that it shows the interconnection between the building and the sea. It's surrounded by water. The Bosphorus, the Golden Horn, these are the two things you see. But also if you approach the city from the south, from the southern harbor, you're approaching it through the Aegean. So it captures the beauty of Constantinople, of this interconnection between land and sea. And it marked that tip of the peninsula with its golden dome. And not surprisingly, in the 6th century Ekphrasis speaks about the ships that used the dome of Hagia Sophia as a beacon. And this is Paul de Silancher. He has a magnificent segment within his long Ekphrasis that speaks about that. So this is an aspect that I would also like to highlight, because the sea is connected to the sound. This sense of infinity and of enveloping yet non-intimate sound is what the acoustics of Hagia Sophia offers. And then I'm going to move to the next set of images that shows the interior of that space. And I also don't want to turn it into a lecture, because that will defeat the purpose of the interview. So George, you have to rein me in.
All right, yes.
Figure out, I know it's a challenge of really how to cut this and allow for dynamic aspect to appear. So, at this point, I would like to say a couple of words about the acoustics, but I could also stop and see if there is a direction you want me to take.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so I think most of our viewers will know. I mean, Hagia Sophia, it was the largest church in the Christian world for 1,000 years. I believe it's still the largest domed structure that's a Christian church. I mean, it's absolutely enormous, and it's all stone and marble and so forth. And so it would have a very unique and distinctive acoustic print, I guess, as you would say, right? And this is what you wanted to, this is what you really wanted to study, is how does a space like this, unlike any other, right? Certainly any other in the pre-modern world, what did that do to sound, to prayer, to ritual, and so forth? All right, so tell us, what did it do for it?
So many of our listeners know that with the conversion of the building from a mosque into a museum in 1934, the two main principles on which this conversion was established was modernism and secularism, and their universal values that of culture and history that are embedded in this building. So, and it was opened as a museum of knowledge, and in support of these universal values. Because of secularism and modernism as the two pillars of the modern Republic of Turkey, there was a ban on any performance of vocal or instrumental music in that space. So when I started working in 2008 on this research of Hagia Sophia, discovered the Danish results, I became very quickly aware that the Danish group offered the only legitimate model in which one could work in that space. In other words, collecting acoustic data and then using this acoustic data to create a model, and then use the model in order to auralize sound, because one could not bring singers in that space. We could not test the space with a choir. So the first question for me, among many other things, was, can we get these acoustic measurements? And when I say can we, very early on in 2008, when I read the Danish article, I first connected to a graduate student, Miriam Koller, at Stanford University, at the Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics. And through Miriam, who was working on a project on Peru, I got in touch with the electric engineer, Jonathan Abel. And so in 2008, Jonathan and I are already talking, and I asked Jonathan, could you create an acoustic model with the Danish measurements? He said, sure, I can. But the TU group didn't share their results with us. So we were again at square one. We had to obtain our own results, our own acoustic measurements. And there are many different ways in which one could collect acoustic information. And it's such an important starting point, because one could not engage with the acoustics of that space if there is no possibility to continuously study it, to continuously, in a sense, if you cannot, you have to bring the space somewhere else if you cannot perform in that space in situ. And we quickly realized that, first of all, I'm not trained as an acoustician or as an engineer, and we have to use means that are allowing me to gather as much quality data as possible, knowing that I could not bring heavy equipment nor operate the heavy equipment in that space. And so from a variety of possibilities, there could be starter pistol, wooden claps, to finally a balloon pop. We focused on the balloons because easy to carry, inobtrusive, as opposed to just raising a pistol. You can imagine how it will look. So anyways, we decided we're gonna go in this way. So I packed my bags and I left for Istanbul. This was in 2010. And at the beginning, the first step was actually getting permission. I was in touch with Nina Ergin, who is a professor of Ottoman architecture, who published a couple of years later, or maybe already in 2010, a very important article that was about acoustics of Sinan's building. So with the help of Nina Ergin, I was allowed an appointment with the director of the Hagia Sophia Music in Istanbul. It was a very positive discussion with the permission I received at the end, which allowed me to take balloon pops in the early morning before the trams had started in Istanbul. And I did several of these balloon pops in the space. And from that point on, we had at Stanford, and our, both Jonathan and I co-direct a project called Icons of Sound. In 2010, I was able to obtain the acoustic data that will enable us to build the aural signature of Hagia Sophia and allow us to experiment with this aural signature. So these are the first steps in the process, but I should say probably a couple of other things of what effect this sound had on me. When I came in 2010, this was not the first time I was in Istanbul or in Hagia Sophia, but it was the first time I was listening to that building, which is very unusual. Most of the time, art historians approach buildings as a visual form and physical, material form. So this intangible aspect of the sound is not at the forefront of our attention. For the first time it was, and I remember because I would spend hours in that space from opening to closing, that when I get exhausted because I carried a lot of lenses, architecture is hard to photograph, it needs different, anyways. So I would sit on the floor and close my eyes and listen, because that space is also about listening. An interior of over 250 cubic meters is absolutely huge. The space could take 16,000 people. So it is a covered interior. It's an interior for 16,000 people. And when you're in that space, even if there is no organized performance, as long as you have presence, living bodies in that space, they create sound. The sound of the steps, of speaking, of the birds flying in, because the doves in that space, or the cats moving in that, meowing in that space, all of this causes the interior to respond, and it creates this enveloping sound. So there is no silence in that space as long as there is a body. So in other words, it's almost like Heisenberg's principle that the moment you decide to study, interfere in the system to study the system, it changes. So the moment you enter that space, the space is alive. Your presence, the sound you make, causes the building to reciprocate, to reverberate. And I think these are aspects that profoundly changed the way I was reading texts. And there are two aspects of how I was reading texts. First, I discovered this non-intimate sound that is related and enhanced visually. You have an interior of marble and gold, and that interior of marble and gold is very reflective. So it's not only huge interior volume, but reflective surfaces that leads to a reverberation time of 12 seconds. And so I need to explain what is reverberation. After an initial signal is played in a space, it is the residual energy, sonic energy, that continues to sound in that space until it drops below the level of human audibility. And this, so it's 30 dB drop. And that in Hagia Sophia, that residual energy lasts and it's continuously hearable to human ears for 12 seconds in a range of frequencies. And usually this range of frequencies is in what is the ambitus of the singing voice. So in other words, this Hagia Sophia is an instrument of the human voice. It amplifies it, it gives it presence, and it also makes singing in that space a pleasure because the building sustains the voice. Little energy that is amplified. So you can sing for extended periods of time. And so having seduced you in a sense to aspects of the sound, I will play the sound for you.
Yeah.
And
we should say this is Cappella Romano that you're playing, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So if our listeners aren't familiar, this is without question the most accomplished contemporary group of Byzantine chanters. Led by Alexander Lingus and crew, but it's really phenomenal music when it's just performed in a studio. But you're going to do much more than just the studio.
And there are a couple of other elements that I would like to add. In 2008, Jonathan and I started Icons of Sound. By the same year, 2008, with the help of the Arts Initiative, I was able to invite Cappella Romana to sing at Memorial Church at Stanford, and they sang their repertoire on Grotta Ferrata. And then by 2011, when the Dean's Office supported Icons of Sound, we had funds to invite Cappella Romana, and using our acoustic data and model, we were able for the first time to start auralizing chant in the interior of Hagia Sophia in California, away in a sense, huge distance away from the original site. And this collaboration is ongoing. It has been many years of really fruitful synergy between Art History, the Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics, and Cappella Romana. So here you have a photograph, very grainy photograph of me together with two officials of the Hagia Sophia Music, setting up for the balloon and then eventually popping in. So it was my own decision, in a sense, for this interview to show you some of the photographs of Hagia Sophia that Thomas Whittemore, who is the archaeologist and the founder of the Byzantine Institute of America in 1930, who was charged with the restoration of the mosaics, who unveiled, in a sense, the beauty of Hagia Sophia. And he worked with a very important photographer, Pierre Iskander, or Bedros Iskander, who was the son of a tradition of photographers who took on Photo Sabah, one of the premier photo studios in Istanbul, who were always pioneered as bringing in Western sensitivity to Istanbul. They worked for the Ottoman High Porte, and then they continued on after the First World War and the establishment of the Turkish Republic. So Whittemore hired really a top-notch photographer for the study of Hagia Sophia. And Iskander did films, black and white films, as well as black and white photography. What you're looking at right now is from the series that was Studies of Light. Whittemore never published their only notes on this material. They're very inspirational, but the photography is meant to work as the foil, the visual foil for this exploration of light in the space. And so let me play you the sound. So let me say a couple of things. What you listened right now is just a demo that gives you a sense of what what an anechoic sound is without any room acoustics, because Cappella Romana starts at the beginning of this piece with no room acoustics, extremely dry. And then the Hagia Sophia 12-second reverberation time is imprinted on their singing. And then all of a sudden, a vast space opens for the interior, for the imagination of the listeners. And that's Hagia Sophia. And then just to repeat the experiment, so the listener becomes aware of the process, we come back to dry and then once again wet. So this is a demo piece. This is not how, in a sense, when Cappella Romana performs with us, this is not what we do. We don't, in a sense, stop in the middle of the performance, the imprinting of the acoustic signature. But here to give a sense to you listeners, really what it means to be in that space. Because we are so used to the modern concert hall, which has 2 to maximum 4 seconds reverberation time. So this is on a scale 3 to 4 times more reverberant. And we are not used to this non-intimate sound where words become emanation, where in a sense the intelligibility of speech is greatly hampered, it's obstructed. And this is one of the aspects that Hagia Sophia offers us. It estranges us from what we expect as a public performance should be. And we are so, modernity had also focused us so much on in message, the information, the decoding what is encoded correctly from the end in which it's produced to the end in which it's received. Well, this space is it's about the smoke in a sense, it's about the incense, about the prosody. That language is sensual. It has this intangible sensorial presence that is the prosody, the taste of the words in a sense. And it also allows through this estrangement to push against the register of language and speech, because it's a space where in a sense heaven and earth meet. And it allows, as this reverberant sound envelops the space, to make the divine present through this bodiless voice. So these are the aspects that I wanted to bring.
All right, so I have like a million questions, and let me remind viewers that they can submit questions through the little Q&A button at the bottom of the page, and we'll get to those in a little bit. Okay, so a couple of things. One, you mentioned that in a place that has so much reverberation, it almost impedes speech because there are just so many echoes or what have you. And I wonder if we're trying to understand like the history of liturgy, especially liturgy of the cathedral rite in the Byzantine church, I almost wonder if that's why everything's sung, right? There are no speaking parts, right? It's all sung, whether it's the priest or the people or the chanter or the choir or whatever. It's all sung because the singing builds and builds and builds, and so you have this constant interact, right? I guess there's something about singing that's different than speaking, right? Singing works in the space in a way that speaking doesn't, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I got something right, yeah.
No, it's absolutely right. And that's why the office is called the Sung Office, the Asmatikia Kolothia of Hagia Sophia. And that's why also the Kontakion becomes such an important form, because it's a sung prayer. And I would say also singing is the backbone of Christian devotion, and especially communal singing. That one of the aspects that really fascinates me about late antiquity and the Middle Ages is that there is no audience. Everyone is a participant. And I crave, in a sense, moments in which everyone could be singing. I'm a very bad singer, so I know what I'm talking about. But I have the urge to sing, and I always remember earlier moments in my life when we had to do communal singing, how wonderful it felt, that it made everyone motivated. So there are these aspects of communal singing, and in a space like Hagia Sophia, that would be absolutely amazing. You have elite choirs that have a relatively small size. I say relatively, the elite choir is 25, the psalti, and they perform, half of that choir performs in 2-week rotations. And then there is a much larger choir, the so-called anagnostics, which grow to 160, but only half of them perform. So already 80 people is a huge choir. I mean, it's probably bigger than what AIDA in performance will be in terms of the choir.
I'm curious, for which I honestly don't know the answer. I know that, like, in the work that Susan works with, Susan Harvey, with the Syriac choirs, right? So many of those choirs had female singers. And we know, of course, that there was a female diaconate, and that in Constantinople. I mean, these choirs for which we have some textual evidence in Hagia Sophia specifically, are there any women in those choirs, or we don't know?
We don't have enough information. We do know that there are women choirs, because already Paul the Silentiary mentions the female singers being in the galleries. So the problem becomes when we want to answer it with precision. Yeah. So we have choirs of orphanie, they're also monastic choirs, so we should expect that they're kind of professional choirs in addition to the people who are on the imperial dole on staff in Hagia Sophia. There are other choirs from neighboring churches that are also participating. But then there is clarity that also, not clarity, but we also know that the refrains, which are addressed to everyone, invitation to everyone to participate. So imagine that space with 16,000 voices, in a sense, singing the refrains in the psalmody. That
the Christos Anesti must be amazing, right? Right. Yeah. Okay. So you have a couple more slides you want to show us, and then if oh, good. The next slide is the elevation of the cross. Good, because that's what I wanted to ask you about. All right. So you've given me advance. You've given me some advance notice of a piece that you're about to publish on the development, the Feast of the Exaltation of the Cross, and how what was going on in Jerusalem becomes imported to Constantinople and transformed. And what your real contribution to this is looking at the way that this soundscape, if that's the word I can use, this soundscape of Hagia Sophia impacts the way that this particular feast for the cross develops after the reign of Heraclius. So tell us about that project a little bit.
Already in 2015, Jonathan and I started a conversation with Stanford Life, as well as the Office of the Provost, and we received support and the go-ahead to do a new concert of Cappella Romana. Alex and I discussed what possibilities we have for the repertoire. Alex suggested both selected pieces for Easter, or to focus on the Feast of the Elevation of the Cross. And I don't remember in detail how exactly we arrived at the decision it should be the Exaltation of the Cross, but we wanted to choose a piece that really makes Hagia Sophia, that space, perform to its brightest. And it was a felicitous choice. So when we started working, Alexander Lingus prepared the program, and he transcribed music anew from manuscripts specifically for this concert. And this is probably the first moment in which our collaboration, Icons of Sound on one side and Cappella Romana, joined forces for something that is built from the foundation up. So when they came and performed in 2016, it was fantastic. And it was like this burst of both a sensual experience of listening to a Cappella Romana sing, but as well as this wealth of information, of new research that Alex brought in terms of the restoration of the melodic designs of the pieces from the manuscripts, with the understanding that the received tradition in the Orthodox Church of today is not carrying the cathedral liturgy, it's carrying the monastic liturgy. So that's why the liturgy of Hagia Sophia is so special. And so it is really a resurrection after 500 years to hear what these melodies are, despite the fact that the text is performed today in churches, but it's performed with a different melody. So for me, it was a as I said, very rich data. And I was very glad that I had all of a sudden 2 years to just listen to that music that we recorded and think about it. I had a fellowship at the American Academy in Rome, which was an amazing place. I have never been so happy in my life, surrounded by so much beauty. And it's a space where artists and scholars meet, and it's a perfect environment for dreamers, in a sense. And so I had, in a sense, this chance to be also with both musicologists and composers, and also to be in the city with a very strong medieval tradition and excellent medieval scholarship. So in a sense, it allowed me to continue this discourse. So why am I saying this? Because for the first time, I had the melodies and a lot of historical data in terms of text, in terms of the building, of course, and that survive. And George, your essay that was your inaugural speech about Sosum Kyrie, Don Laon Su, the Troparion for the Exaltation of the Cross, was really an inspiration. You shared it with me very early on before the concert, so I had a chance to read it, and I was very aware of this proto-nationalism that you have discovered in the modifications of the text, that it introduces this notion of violence, and here I'm quoting you, against the enemies of Christianity in completely unbridled manner that is reminiscent of the rhetoric surrounding Constantine the Great. So in other words, Heraclius in the 7th century, with the introduction of this feast, with the recognition that they could no longer protect the relics of the true cross in Jerusalem, so Heraclius brings the relics in 628 to Constantinople for safekeeping in Constantinople, and this is the moment the feast becomes established. And so what we have in terms of music, the Troparion and the Kontakion, they're not the only pieces, but they're two signature pieces that were designed for Hagia Sophia. So I had music that is specifically tailored for that space. And it was really exciting to start thinking about it. What does it do? So I'm showing you a couple of things. We have the interior. It's a Lessing, Eric Lessing's photograph. Lessing was the soul, in a sense, of the art historian and medievalist. So he, after the Second World War, he did some of the best photographs of many of the important monuments throughout the Mediterranean. So this is another photograph that is as evocative as Bedros Iskender that we looked at earlier, with this beautiful poetry of light in it. And then I'm showing you the reconstruction by Mainstone about the liturgical furnishing, so that you can imagine where the elite choir, these 12 people singing, would stay. They will, when they perform, they will climb up the stairs of the ambo, and they'll sing from the ambo. Do you see that? I'm trying to put the cursor there.
Yeah, no, the cursor is circling it. Yeah, you've got it.
Good, very well. And so that space you could see is on the eastern rim of the dome. So in other words, as sound is projected, it's projected towards the dome from the side, and it allows for the sound to travel, reflect, and some of this energy rain down. And for me, I think this was, I want to see what I have next. So for me, this was a really wonderful kind of question that I was pursuing of how the music fits the space and how the acoustics of the space respond to it, what is enhanced. And so I would like to show you one of these examples. This is the, put in modern, the esteematic notation in what the Sosum Kyrie and the Troparion Sosum Kyrie looks like. It is composed in mode 1, and the most important aspect that what the discovery that I made here was how particular words get the highest pitches, and the space responds to these high pitches in a magnificent way. It is the dome that responds, and I could hear that in our auralization, that all of a sudden this golden rain appears. And so I will show you here that as you look at the first line, and maybe I think I have options. Just give me a chance. And so as they begin Sosum Kyrie and Ton Laon Su, we see the first rise with eulogison. more or less, and the melody reaches an octave above the final. It's an octave, it reaches high D. And as I play the melody, you have a chance to listen to that. And why am I saying it? Because in earlier collaboration, there was a very important scholar, Vyacheslav Vostok from McGill University, who became fascinated with our Icons of Sound project. And he was fascinated to such an extent that without us knowing, he went to Istanbul with expensive machinery and gathered acoustic data. So by 2013, for our first concert of Hagia Sophia, he came to us. He was a fellow at Karma and said, I have all this information in a sense. But he presented a talk, and eventually I published in Aural Architecture his contribution. He spoke about acoustic rain, that the sonic energy that gathers in the dome rains down. And why is this important? Because most of the time, sacred buildings in Christianity have the shoebox form, is the basilica. So sonic energy travels to the upper parts of the building, but because they have wood trusses, this energy is absorbed. So you have the sense of ascent, of flight in a sense. Humanity is lifted up to the divine, but then it dissipates in a sense. With Hagia Sophia, you have the ascent and then you have the descent. So the space in a sense continuously reaffirms divine grace, that there is a charis that descends on the congregation. And so that's the aspect. That's where, in a sense, the technology gets theology, that the space with its dome allows for the perceptual presence of divine blessing in the space, and it manifests itself as a golden rain. So having said that, I'll play for you the piece, segment at least. I only played a small segment because we don't have, I don't want to take too much time. So you have to realize that we are right now dependent, all of us listening to us speaking and listening to the sound, we're dependent on whatever loudspeakers our computers have. So the effect is not as prominent as I'm playing it through your computer and you're listening to it. What you need is a high quality headphones to listen to that sound. That's actually how I was exploring this piece. I'll play nonstop in a loop this piece, and I'll listen to it, and I could really transport myself into that space. So if you feel that you are underwhelmed, part of the underwhelming is whatever loudspeakers you have in your computer right now. But through Icons of Sound and Capella Romana, there is a new CD called The Lost Voices of Hagia Sophia that gives you surround sound, and in a sense, there you could enjoy this sound to its best potential. So I give this as a teaser that right now you have listened to something that is imperfect, but you have a chance to really immerse yourself in the acoustics of Hagia Sophia through this CD, The Lost Voices of Hagia Sophia.
Okay. So we're already almost at an hour, and I have more questions for you, and we haven't even gotten to questions. Let me just two really quick things, and then we'll take a couple questions from the audience. So one is you know, you're a female scholar, one of the world's absolute foremost experts of this space, of the intersection of music and material culture and literature. And we didn't even talk about what you do about viewing icons and candlelight and all of that. That's so magnificent. How has this impacted your experience of the church? Right, you come from Eastern Europe. You grew up in the church, right? How can you tell us a little bit about that and what it's like to be a female scholar that is either used or utterly ignored by the church?
I think for me this is a very difficult question, and a question I approach with trepidation, because I grew up in socialist Bulgaria, and I was a family that had, in a sense, both sides. So my mother will take me to church, but it's kind of surreptitious, that will light candles. And it was one specific church in the center of town, so it is not so visible, prominent. That church had 2 doors, and you enter into kind of a bezisten, a covered walkway, and you enter from one door, you can quickly light up your candle and then exit from another door, and it is another covered street. So in a sense, as if you have never entered a church. Anyways, so one of the things that always mesmerized me was these dark interiors, because these churches were covered in so much soot, that I always thought I equated, in a sense, religion with this darkness and the candlelights. And then one amazing experience was, as I was finishing high school, the change happened, the fall of the Berlin Wall. And it happened that first Easter, we were all allowed to celebrate, and everyone who wanted gathered in Alexander Nevsky, the Cathedral of Sofia. And the energy of that space, we couldn't enter the church, there were so many, but the moment in which the light came out and eventually we all lit our candles from this central light, it was mesmerizing as an experience. And these are very moving moments. So I find always myself, I don't know how to be of a community, because I did not grow up in a church as a community experience. And every time, for instance, that I had a good friend, a good Greek friend, a graduate student while I was an undergraduate at Dartmouth, and she tried to bring me to the Greek church on a couple of occasions. But it actually scares me, this notion that it's a family, and the way it is more a social thing than spiritual. So I always seek moments in which I could commune with something that is way beyond, where they actually know other people. And so that's why I say it's a very hard question for me to answer. The things I crave beauty, and so much of my research is, in a sense, the recognition that the way these rituals are coordinated, they're works of art, and they require the collective artistic energy of so many people, that it is the architecture, but it's also the liturgy, it's also the music, the text, the music, and it's also the coordination, and it's also the lights in that space. So in this makes medieval art for me not about great big names. It is about this collective effort to create something that produces transcendence. So I continue to be that way. Rome.
Thank
all of
you.
this practicing.
It's very personal and very honest. And I do want to get to the questions. There's one to shift gears completely, right? I mean, you've spent so much time thinking about Hagia Sophia, so I can't not ask you what you think about Hagia Sophia, right? I mean, the recent decisions in Turkey, I know you've written about it. We've all written about it, right? I mean, just can you share for those viewing, I mean, what you think about its reconversion into a mosque and the danger that this poses for scholarship, for civilization, etc.
I was not surprised when it happened, starting already at the end of May of this year, because what I saw and the speed with which things were changing. In 2016, the space was almost non-recognizable compared to 2010 when I was doing the acoustic measurements. And it hit me very deeply because what I was seeing is that a lot more scaffolding was being built, and the interior was slowly being straitjacketed in particle walls and linoleum. The whole gallery level was covered in linoleum, and the particle walls were on the north side where they started illegally to build up the masjid, for which UNESCO and Mykonos had not given permission. So anyways, and what these changes also brought about is that you are cordoned off as to where to walk. The space is about poetry of movement, that you have light that comes from different angles in that space, and you have a continuous partial views. And as a visitor to that space, you're attracted by the partial views because you want to see more. There's only a couple of spaces from which, if you are in the Kalichoros, in the space under the dome, clearly you are inhabiting the center. But if you're in the galleries or in the aisles, you have these partial views, and these partial views push you to move. So that dynamism was eviscerated, taken out from the experience. And then there was this crass use of light, that all the light would focus on the mimbar and the mihrab, and they were recently polished. So this, we're speaking 2016. And then there was a huge scaffolding that was built on the northern side of the building, in taking
I was there and saw that, yeah.
And to me, all of these were big, invasive changes, because the marble and the gold could no longer perform, could no longer speak in that space. And then all this modern ugliness was brought in, the linoleum, the particle walls, the scaffolding for no reason, because there is a reason, but it's not a structural reason. I understand if they're trying to upkeep the building. So my first wave of melancholy, I would say, happened there. And I realized how body and building are so closely connected, that the changes to the building is violence to the body, and made me think about many other issues that are connected with Hagia Sophia. So I find it very painful to talk, and it goes so much beyond words in a sense. And it's also a space that we also have to acknowledge and reckon with. It hides also so many other aspects. That building was there when so much violence was happening, even when it was a museum. It was a concession. It was a concession to secularism and modernity, but it's a modernity that is about forgetting. And these are some of the problems that we are seeing, because so much of what modern Turkey is denying history and denying this multi-ethnic, multi-religious voice, and it leads to more and more problems. The most recent example is this, and these are aspects that we could talk about. And I'm a person that, in a sense, had their youth being part of a state that separated religion from the state, right. And I think that taking memory and taking spirituality is something that has really very deep implications. And having said that, I'm also very aware that there are so many people in Turkey who do not stand behind this change. And the incapacity to speak, because there is no freedom of speech, that silence is another form of violence. So there are people struggling on many sides.
Yeah. And no, it's so problematic on so many levels. I can hear the emotion in your voice just talking about it. All right, let's turn to some of our questions. People have been patient for a very long time. We're over an hour already. Several of these from loyal friends and supporters of the center. Valerie Karras wrote in with some comments about the fact that we know there were deaconesses and female choirs, but she has a more specific question. Is there any way to determine how the acoustics would differ in different parts of Hagia Sophia? All right. So, for example, if the female deacons would have sung maybe from one of the galleries, or a female choir would have sung from one of the galleries, would the acoustic effect have been different? And were you able to actually manage and filter for? I'm adding. Did you sort of account for that, or did you really, when you ran the computer generated filter, did you really just sort of center it under the dome as though that's the spot?
So the answer is yes, and we actually have more data to work in this direction, but there are certain limitations as to how we can use this data, and that's why we haven't used it. Yes, but what you are listening in our performances is the ideal listener position of the elite, male elite, who would gather in the space around in the Kalichoros. In terms of the balloon pops were done from this point of view, and that's in a sense why we have this data and we can use it freely. We had subsequently brought more equipment. This was in 2014 and 2015, but it came with a requirement that does not allow us to go in this direction, which is part of the mandate of the museum. And now it's even more problematic because it also is the security of the families of the members of the group who are in Turkey. And so anyways, we cannot go in that direction. But it is also how available this building is to study. Modern technology, in a sense, gives us a chance to really refine this model. If we are allowed to work freely in that space, we haven't. We have been given a series of kind of a rook interventions in the space in which quickly Bissera popped 4 balloons and we can have these 4 balloons. It's not that we don't desire to work in a systematic way. That wasn't the way that was going to unfold for us. And the window was closing. I could feel it even in 2010. So the freedom that the TU group had in 2003 was not what we experienced in 2010, what I experienced in 2010. And by that time, we had to figure out work on the ground that will allow us maximum with a minimum.
Okay, thank you. So Evgenia writes, and she simply asks for a really, I think we may have just skipped past this. Can you explain just very briefly what the actual balloon pop does?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes, it is a signal that excites the system, and it produces energy in a large spectrum from low to high frequencies. And that's why it allows a very good, you can think of it, snapshot, acoustic snapshot of the building. The space imprints itself on the sound. And because the sound goes from very low to very high frequencies, we have a very broad range, much broader than the range of the human voice. And that's why we get a good impulse response from it. That's all. The reason why balloon pops are not used, and this is where the scholarship of Jonathan Abel comes in, is that when the balloon pops, the rubber collapses and this interferes with the expanding rays. So he figured out a way in which we can clean the balloon pop from the rubber falling in and interfering. So
yeah, right. And basically all this is run, then it's recorded and then run through a series of software algorithms that then allows you to then filter anything you want, right? When we were preparing for this, you said, well, I could play Suzanne Vega if you want, right, through the filter. Telling are like, no, let's go with Capella Romano. Okay, Thomas Sorensen, who you probably know, he writes, thank you. And this is something that I've wondered about, right? When you say 16,000 people could fit in this church, how can a sermon have been heard, right? How would the words have been understood with all of those echoes, right? And do you really think Lan Kondakia, like say Romanos's, on the Nativity or on Mary at the Cross or whatever, do you really think a Lan Kondakia could have been performed in Hagia Sophia? Would it have given any meaning at all, right? Just because of how long it would take and all the sounds jumbling together and so forth. So do you have thoughts on those?
So again, I can answer the question with the evidence we have so far, but I could not offer a perfect unfolding of that phenomenon. So what we know from other spaces, and this is the research of Sharon Gerstel and her group, that in the Acheropoitos in Thessaloniki, the Basilica of the Acheropoitos is preserving evidence for low parapet walls that allow the nave to be separated from the side aisles and then curtained off. So in other words, you create a space within the space, and the curtains that are put in the intercolumniations will create a much less reverberant interior to accommodate homilies, to accommodate this listening of speeches in that space. So we do know that Hagia Sophia in Constantinople had curtains as well. So there are ways in which you modify that. Another aspect that I need to bring, when you have 16,000 people, it will decrease the reverberation time. Our model is for the building empty. So they will absorb some of this energy. So it won't be 12 seconds reverberation time. It will be lower. It will probably be 7 or 8 seconds reverberation time, still much longer than what you would expect from a 21st century point of view to be reasonable. But I think there is a couple of other aspects that are important. When it comes, so the sermons is the most difficult one to answer. And when we think about the great figures like Chrysostomos, he is creating the speeches for a basilica. How are his speeches, in a sense, perceived once the building changed into a domed interior? And to what extent also we are dealing with, some of these sermons are well known. So the homilies, in a sense, the general message will be already ingrained from years of experience. And that is basically the answer for the music and for the text of the music, that you're dealing with a repertoire in terms of its text that is very well known. So in a sense, space like Hagia Sophia allows for this to be defamiliarized with something that you're familiar, and just show that's the moment of transcendence in which, yes, you know the words, but they sound different. I think there's some other aspect that the space gives that is beyond you. You're there because you excite the system. So it is a continuous synergy between what is animate and what is inanimate. We think of buildings as dead, in a sense. They are alive, and they are alive through us entering in that space. But through us, it comes the other aspect, that human presence is based on, divine presence appears through human participation. There was a beautiful volume on Choros in ancient culture where it says that divinity is present in the mirror of the human performance. That's exactly what happens. So in other words, these are some of the most fascinating aspects to engage with now that we can go deeper into this synergistic analysis of architecture, acoustics, music, and the text that we are not aware of. We read the text and we read it for meaning, but what about if you read the text in terms of enveloping experience? Mm-hmm. When the timiama of the words are more important than the semantics of the words.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Okay, I'm going to get us to, we're going to do two more. Okay, I apologize, we're not going to get to all of them, but I'm going to do two more. So we'll keep the answers short. Is it possible that the wide frequency range and ambience of the sound, which almost mimics the full spectrum of the sound, was included in the development of the pneumatic organ of the Western Church, because it was known to the Western developers of the pipe organ and used as a model to create the same ambient soundscape? So that question doesn't mean anything to me because I don't know anything about any of this. But maybe it does to you. I think what Stratos is going for is there, like, Hagia Sophia is such a unique and special and influential space. Does the reverberation of the sound and the spectrum that it enables, is that an influence upon the development of the pipe organs that developed later? Do you know of any such connection?
I don't know of any text that speaks to this direct connection, but what I could say is that Byzantium offered as a very high level gift to, if I remember correctly, it was to Charlemagne.
I think Charlemagne, yeah.
If it's not to Charlemagne, then it's to his son, a gift of an organ, which means that there is a clear understanding, in a sense, of the sound of the universe and the harmony of the universe that is produced by this instrument. Now, did they see a direct connection between the acoustics of Hagia Sophia and the organ? I haven't done this research. I don't have a ready answer for it. It's a fascinating aspect. So I think we are gonna leave it open here, but I do want to say something because I quickly scanned some of the questions.
Yeah.
And there was one saying, could you say something about the architects? Because the architects is another story. Anthemios of Tralles and Isidorus of Miletus, because they are the last examples of the powerful Hellenistic school of Neoplatonic school, where in a sense Hellenistic knowledge of engineering, physics, and mathematics was at the forefront. And they were invited to build Hagia Sophia. And they were invited by another prominent member of this pagan elite. and right now I'm blanking on his name. He's for Ioannis, but what is the last name of the Ioannis? I cannot think of right now. He committed suicide. He was put to trial for a second time on charges of paganism, and he committed suicide, and he was not given a proper burial. But he was the figure in 532 who was charged with the collection of the resources for the beginning of construction. So he was instrumental of inviting Anthemius and Isidorus. And when one looks at the building itself, it has the Justinianic interior, had no monumental figure or decoration. And it has the large dome had in its apex a cross. And there are all these crosses that we see from the Justinianic decoration, cross in a circle. And this is a formula that later on becomes a formula for inspiriting, but it's connected to monads. And it is notion of this continuous generation, a chain of generation that is extracted from the monad. And it's a self-generating system, the one. And so we have a space that already in the moment of its creation, it's about violence and suppression, because it's first of all the Nika revolt and the thousands of people killed at the Hippodrome. And then there is a suppression of the pagan elite in a series of purges at the time of Justinian. That space spoke to that pagan elite in a sense. And it is this, and also the troubled relationship I have with beauty. Beauty is seductive, but there's so much that hides behind this beauty. And so I want to plug in a sense, this voice of the new Platonic voice, that Hagia Sophia is also otherness at the center of identity, because it's a space that is created on Neoplatonism as religion and Hellenistic science. So that's the core, in a sense, of Orthodox Christianity. And it's very important it's extimacy, in a sense, the other at the center of identity.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you so much. And then the very final thing, Judith just asks about the lost voices of Hagia Sophia. How do we get that? I imagine you can buy it on Amazon, right? Or Capella Romana has their own website. Or are you going to give us a screen share for it?
I'll give you a screen share for this. So here is the album of Capella Romana. It is available on Amazon. It's also available in Naxos, Naxos Music Library. Amazon probably be the easiest way to reach it. And also it's in Spotify, the Lost Voices of Hagia Sophia. So there are a lot of means in which you can get to this album and own it. And I also put a plug-in for our Icons of Sound website. We have produced a documentary film that explores the stages in which this research had gone for what is now over a decade of work. And it reflects, in a sense, the spirit in which Hagia Sophia was built. And in other words, it's a collaboration. It's a collaboration of people with expertise in different fields. And this is also an international collaboration in terms of the way we conduct it. The film was produced by Duygu, directed by Duygu Eruchman. She's from Turkey. She finished the documentary film program at Stanford. So I want to speak to that so much of this work in which I am involved, it's about collaboration, it's about synergy. And the changes we are seeing are putting chains on this mode of working.
Okay, Bissera, thank you so much. It was really a treat to speak with you. Your work is just so impressive. I didn't mention, but I should have at the beginning, Bissera is on the advisory council for the Journal of Orthodox Christian Studies, which the center produces, and so we're happy to have her on that board. And the last thing to note is that our next webinar, episode 8, will be with Christina Stokel, who is an expert, really one of the world's foremost experts on the interaction between the Russian government and the Moscow Patriarchate. And we don't yet have an exact date settled for that, but it'll be the middle of September, maybe the 15th, 16th, something like that. And you, if you're on our mailing list, you will certainly see that notification. And if you are not on our mailing list, then by all means, you should go to fordham.edu/orthodoxy and just join our mailing list. So thank you so much. Thank you, Bissera. And have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you. George, may I ask you?
Yeah.
If you have a chance, usually after a Zoom meeting when one doesn't host, the Q&A evaporates. I would like to read the questions, so if you can send me a copy.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
You can just